Hello and welcome to Fearless DIY Music. My name is Tristan Lass, and today I'm joined by my dear friend Kevin Gamble. We're going to be discussing a topic today, and we're just going to go ahead and skip recent channel content, although the dumpster guitar apparently was a hit with all of you and with him. You should check out that video if you have not. I will link it in at the end of the video so that you can check it out. Anyway, today's topic is going to be the most recent release by JHS pedals. They've had kind of an interesting year. The Not a Dumble ended up being a little bit of a misstep. There's been some, just like online, and then the Ross thing last year. So JHS has kind of been in some not, I wouldn't say trouble, but it's kind of interesting. It just seems like for a while there, they seem to just have their, finger on the pulse of the industry and just cranking out products that everybody really, really was interested and wanted. And maybe this new release is something that everybody's interested in and wants, but it's something that left me completely baffled. And that's the Tascam 424 gain stage pedal. I still have one of my multi-track cassette recorders. I would never think to use it as an amplifier or a gain stage type unit. And that's just maybe because I know Kevin and I grew up with these things. These are the first things we ever recorded with were, cassette multi-tracks, up to 8 tracks. Usually they were 4 tracks though. And it was such a relief to move past that and kind of go on to other things. They functioned. I don't have any nostalgia for them. I think people our age wouldn't. But, I think the thing that really baffles me about this pedal, though, that JHS has put together, is that they talk about, it's a complete recreation of the circuit. And I'm just kind of like, okay, well, these were relatively inexpensively made units. So you're saying that you lovingly detailed a trim pot, amplifier, a fader, and then a master fader with with the master gain output, and for $250, which I don't quite get it. The sounds that the pedal produces are not anything that I'm interested in ever producing on purpose, and I just kind of wanted to get Kevin's take. I mean, have we entered into like peak retro nostalgia lo-fi zone with this pedal? Is that because I get that you don't want to go hunt for that $50 Tascam 424 that you could find at your neighbor's garage sale or in a thrift store somewhere, and so they wanted to make something easy and they wanted to make something that was marketable and easy for everybody to use to attain those sounds. But are those sounds really useful to anybody besides the featured artist they kept talking about, McGee or whatever? So I want your take on this, Kev.
Well, I think you hit a lot of good points there, Tris, and especially kind of that last one, which is I think there's just an inherent appeal, whether it's rational or not, to having something from the past that is, sort of out of step with current efficiency, repackaged in a small, portable, sort of cool looking, retro looking box that you can easily just grab and plug in and sort of connect to that, emotionally, if not literally. And I get that, I feel that, when I looked at it, I was like, oh, there's a certain just sort of emotional appeal of that. We've seen it with the other pedals you've talked about, the Rockman reissue and the Peavy's doing reissues now in form of pedals with the Bandit and Decade and things like that. And so it's like there's an immediate visceral appeal to that. It's like, oh, I feel what I felt kind of coming through this tidy, modern package. But you also made a good point about the sound, and people who maybe didn't live through that era can't fully appreciate the reality that until we were, I think it was after high school, wasn't it, when either of us got our first multi-track? You got the first one, I think, and
I got the first one. Yeah, I had that
Yamaha.
I had the Yamaha, yeah, which had
and then a few years later, I got a Yamaha 4-track, and before then, we literally couldn't stack sounds and do multi-track recordings. It just wasn't something that was available to us in our environments. And so, what really was so special about that, like you said, was the function. It wasn't the sound, the function of being able to do that, but the sound. We knew at the time, you had like you had the Dolby switch, so you could choose between a clear hissy sound or a clean muffled sound.
Yeah.
We knew that we were dealing with cheap, limited sound capability, the three EQ knobs or two
Or
or
two,
whatever
yeah.
it was. Yeah, it was probably most of the time it was two. And so we always knew that we were dealing with limited sound, and we always wanted to get, past that. And even when we were on to the next stage or the stage after that, there wasn't much feeling of having lost something. And I think when I look back at the 4-track days, the thing that I hear in the sound of what I recorded on my Yamaha 4-track, there are things that I miss that I think had to do more with tape than with the actual preamp in the unit. There's a certain quality I got at times when recording the bass that's harder to get on a computer. There's that sort of bass line. I don't know if it's saturation or what it did to the sound EQ wise, but that's sort of an artifact, an after effect, but it's not something I would want everything to go through. And so it is really interesting that it's doing the preamp, and even with like the PV pedals, they seem to be focused on the preamp. They're leaving out EQ and some of the other things that sort of shape the sound. And so I love the concept of like one of my old Yamaha 4-tracks in a pedal, but the preamp itself just doesn't seem like it would be what captures the essence of that sound. So it's, I get the appeal, but it feels like the overall experience might not hit the mark from a retro point of view, to where now it's just another effect pedal for somebody who doesn't have that previous background.
Yeah, and these things were made cheaply. You can't tell me that those preamps are like, these really well engineered things. It's not like pulling the preamp out of a Nev board, which is, or something like that, which, JHS has done before. This is they're just kind of repeating the color box, but in a lo-fi, cassette 4-track version kind of thing.
Lo-fi color box.
Yeah, I mean, they probably even borrowed some of the color box, schematic to do this, because all they had to do is just change the values to match what the crappy 4-track recorder would be. So I feel like there's a little bit of a lack of imagination in this. I feel like a $250 price point for bad preamps stacked on top of each other is kind of bizarre. If it were a $99 pedal, I'd be like, oh, well, okay, somebody wants to use this as a noisemaker or a sweetener or whatever. But I find it hard to believe that this pedal can do things that you can't get in a DSP somewhere. I am sure there are a billion 4-track or lo-fi filter plugins that you can buy to do these exact same things, So I just, like I said, it leaves me cold. I think that, yeah, there's a lot to be said, like you said, people who didn't live through the era, and the limitations of it all, the frustrations. I mean, you want to go even further. If they start putting out reel-to-reel, like Fostex F, or the 8, the 8-track Fostex that I reel-to-reels that I used to have.
I remember that.
Oh my goodness, those things were a nightmare to work with. And if somebody really wants to create a retro, scratching your head, going, oh my God, why is this happening to me? They should start, replicating units like that. I mean, because that was the step up from the Tascam 4-track, So I don't know. I think that a lot of people, like you've said many times before about the recording process that we were describing, late last year, early this year. I think that the infinite possibilities, people are kind of like, I think there is like a desire to go, oh, something simple, maybe something that isn't meant to sound that great, and that's interesting, or a way to refocus being creative. However, I think that, given that we do have these beautiful digital, native environments that we can record into that are pristine and completely malleable, you don't have to be crazy with the plugins, and you can experiment more with sounds in the room. And if you want lo-fi sounds, you can use a cheap microphone through a cheap amp in your room and still get like a live ambient sound with a lot of life in it, rather than just plugging a pedal in and then putting it through an XLR cable, into your interface. I think that, I feel like it's a little bit of a marketing grab too, just off of the hotness, or the last year's hotness of this McGee person or whatever. It kind of feels like that. It because like JHS sometimes does chase these kind of like lower tier celebrity musicians. You know, they also did that always on vibrato pedal or whatever. I forget what her name was, that the musician who uses that sound. And so I don't know. Maybe, perhaps it has an audience. Maybe I'll get roasted in the comments, but I think that I don't think there's much further to go with any of this. I mean, seriously, this should be the end of the road, I think, for kind of doing these types of pedals. And there's a lot of boutique makers out there who have made, like, the warped vinyl pedal pops into my mind. There's other lo-fi pedals that have been around for a long time that actually have a way more robust feature set at the same price point or lower than what this one's offering. So that's my take.
I think that says a lot. I think, kind of like you said, charitably, there's under all of this, there's a reaction against, the sort of homogenation of sound that seems to have happened in music production. Like you said, our platform is really neutral now, so it doesn't have to be homogenous. Everything doesn't have to sound the same, but the prevailing ways of doing things that everyone is told they have to do does make things sound the same. And so I think the upside to this is a reach for something authentic, something that isn't just like everyone else, and maybe something that limits the options available to give you, I think people realize that a more authentic personal experience can come when we choose our limitations, and that creates a signature voice for us. But is this pedal the way to do that, or is it just one in the sea of options? Because I think what the Porta Studio was an environment for you to put everything into, and I don't think one pedal can really replicate that, especially when it's replicating just a part of the unit itself. So it's a good effort. I think maybe more imaginative things could come from this if people use this as a spark of an idea. And I'm kind of glad that a younger artist went through something like the real thing and is getting appreciation for it. I'm glad to see people, appreciating actual, instruments, played through real physical things. So maybe this will all shake out as a fork in the road in a positive direction, but this doesn't quite seem like a final destination.
Agreed. And it is good to see that people are trying to come up with creative ways to make sounds in the room, which is what he was doing, it seems like, McGee. So anyway, if you've made it this far into the video, please hit that subscribe button. Likes are greatly appreciated. Share it around. Leave something in the comments. Do you have an opinion on this type of pedal, this particular pedal, or using old technology in a repackaged new, format, and trying to proclaim that it's something that's, revolutionary? I don't think so. You let me know what you think. You take care, and we'll see you next time.